On tonight's edition of The Best Times, our topic is driving. We'll visit the AARP Driver Safety Program. We'll discuss the hard decision of when to hang up the keys. We'll explore a transportation alternative for those who have stopped driving, and you'll learn how to protect one of driving's most important senses, your eyesight. Funding for The Best Times is provided by the Plow Foundation, striving to do the greatest good by helping the greatest number of people since 1964. Additional funding is provided by the members of WKNO. Thank you. Hello, I'm Chris Hardaway. Welcome to this edition of The Best Times, a series that looks at life after 50. Driving is something we've all been doing since we were 15 or 16 years old. We've been behind the wheel for so long, we take this freedom for granted. But as we age, things can change. Do you still consider yourself a safe and knowledgeable driver? Well, here's a question for you. Where do most accidents involving older drivers occur? Is it A, roundabouts, B, construction zones, C, intersections, or D, interstate exit ramps? Watch this next segment closely and you'll answer this question correctly and learn how to keep yourself behind the wheel. Driving is something we've all done for more years than we'd like to admit. But despite our years of experience, it's a skill that can grow rusty with age. For over 25 years, AARP has offered a driver safety program designed to refresh those skills. And as an added benefit, course completion entitles you to an insurance discount. George Coleman is the state coordinator for the program.
The world is changing so fast every day that we need to be aware of all the changes, The cars are changing, the roads are changing, things like that. They need to be aware of their body changes too. We try to go through with seniors to make them aware of the changes.
The classroom course is divided into 2 4-hour sessions and covers a broad range of topics, everything from seatbelts to stop signs. And new automotive technologies are covered, things like ABS brakes, backup cameras, and crash warning systems.
You need to know what the technology is when you buy a car. In one of our videos, so the lady was talking and said, well, hey, I found out what this was for today, Well, what if it had been an important feature of that car? And she just found out what it was for.
Statistically, drivers aged 50 to 75 are involved in no more traffic accidents than younger age groups. But beyond age 75, there is an increase in accidents, and driver deaths per mile driven are substantially higher after age 75, a factor of the frailties of old age. Intersections are where most crashes involving older drivers occur.
Intersections are the worst for seniors. It's more people, they get confused. They make a left turn in front of a car coming at them too fast. They don't realize it. They try to make left turns and stuff. So we preach a lot on intersections and how people treat intersections, things like that.
The course offers strategies to address age-related shortcomings such as reduced vision or hearing and slowed reaction times. It covers various road and highway conditions and addresses the sometimes confusing number of signs and signals. The goal of the course is to keep older drivers behind the wheel for as long as possible. But our changing health condition means someday we may have to hand over the car keys to our children. George has some advice about having that conversation with Mom and Dad.
With Mom, Dad, let's take a ride, Let's still take, and maybe start pointing out, Dad, you're kind of getting over the headline, or Mom, whatever the case. Point out little areas that you see, and say, Mom, I love you, or Dad, I love you dearly, but, I see things that you might, and I want to keep you around as long as I can. But you try to point something out to them.
The sad fact is 4.5 people die in car accidents in this country every hour. Knowing your car, knowing the rules of the road, and knowing yourself are the keys to staying safe and staying behind the wheel. With 78 million baby boomers heading toward retirement, the number of older drivers on the roads will increase significantly in the coming years. And that will underscore the need for education programs to keep older drivers safely behind the wheel. George has one final bit of common sense advice.
Don't get out driving in the early morning rush hour traffic and the afternoon rush hour traffic. Generate your appointments where you're in the middle of the day or off traffic jams, things like that.
If you'd like more information about the AARP Driver Safety Program, go to their website. Classes are offered monthly in a variety of locations. There's also an online version of the program. And what about our opening safety question? Did you get it right? Intersections are the most dangerous situations for older drivers. Failure to yield right-of-way at intersections is responsible for 35% of all traffic violations for drivers age 55 and older. Since we were teenagers, driving has represented independence. We can get in our car whenever we want and go wherever we want. But what happens when aging begins to affect our driving skills negatively? How can we know when it's time to quit? And how can we have the conversation about hanging up the keys? Ken, we know that aging is something we can't avoid, and we certainly don't want to stop driving. But how does aging affect driving?
There are a number of ways that aging affects driving. If you think about it, Chris, you've got seniors who are dealing with more chronic conditions than they did when they were younger. So their reaction time, their response time is slower. You've got memory issues. And memory issues can be something as simple as, and this sounds simple, but it can cause a lot of problems, forgetting the difference between the brake and the gas pedal. Which one is for go?
Which seems so, I mean, that would seem to be ingrained in you, but it is a problem. It is a problem.
Absolutely a problem, and that has to do with memory. And thinking about physical issues and things like arthritis, you know, when you and I learned to drive, we were told to look behind us in a couple of ways. Number one, through those mirrors, but also which way you're supposed to turn. You're supposed to turn to the right and look back over your right shoulder. If you're 87 years old, it's not likely that you're going to be able to do that
not an easy
with
thing
a lot
to
of
do.
ease.
No. What about medications? Because we're talking about health-related issues. As we age, we've got to take medications for all the various problems. That plays a role too.
Let's take, for instance, that 70, 80-year-old person that has 10 or more medications. It's not easy knowing what you're taking, let alone knowing when to take it and making sure you're taking everything and taking everything properly. Because if you don't, things like dizziness and sleepiness and things that will occur potentially while you're driving. So it's a huge potential factor for unsafe driving.
Now, there have got to be warning signs. So let's talk about those warning signs. You've put together a list of 10 warning signs. So let's talk about a few of them.
I think one of the most common ones that families can look for in their senior loved ones are those mysterious dents on grandma's car or dad's car. Oftentimes, the senior will know how they got there. Sometimes they may not know how they got there. But it's most likely times when they've caused something to happen, when they've backed into something or pulled into something forward, that can be a result of any of the things we just talked about, any of the physical limitations that they might have, which are natural things that happen when you grow older. Some of these things, these warning signs, that there are 10, some of them are more obvious than others. I would recommend families drive with their senior loved ones to notice things like this. For instance, things like riding the brake. How many times have you been behind a vehicle and the brake lights are on constantly? It's not necessarily because they're confused about brake and gas, But if you think about it, if you're unsure about your ability to react quickly, it's very likely you're going to have one foot on the gas pedal and one foot on the brake. You can respond more quickly. Driving too slow or driving too fast is a common sign of seniors who are unsafe at driving. But there should be a family involved in that. There should be somebody talking to her about the fact that perhaps she's an unsafe driver.
So if you identify these symptoms, these warning signs, if you see them and you're a family member or a friend, how do you go about starting to have the conversation?
I think the key here, there's a couple of keys. The one I want to touch on is that the conversation has to be positive. The right approach might be a conversation where you start at something like, Dad, I noticed something. I noticed a dent on your car. Can we be honest? Can we talk a little bit about your safety and the safety of those around you? So I think having the conversation in a positive manner and listening, because it goes back to independence. If a senior is told that they can't drive anymore, that's their independence. Mm-hmm. So be conscious of what their concerns are. They very likely are going to be angry. They're going to be anxious. It can cause loneliness because they're thinking, I'm not going to get to do what I was doing. Address those concerns, and most importantly, have a plan. Don't start talking to your senior unless you have a plan. And that plan should include alternatives to getting them to places.
Let's talk about quitting driving in stages, because seniors can do things. There's no point in them driving when they don't feel comfortable, like rush hour, for example. Why drive during rush hour if you're a retired senior, right?
Sure, yeah, that's a great example. And so some people watching this may be thinking, well, how am I going to talk to Mom or Dad about taking the keys away? That may not be the answer right now. The answer may be restricting driving during certain times. And you brought up a great one, nighttime. I worked with a lady for years, a senior lady. She drove fine in the daytime, but at 5 o'clock in the wintertime and at 8 o'clock in the summertime, she and her husband were at home and they never got out because they knew when it gets dark, neither one of them could see very well and they weren't going to be safe drivers. Things like weather. If a storm is coming, Mom, please don't plan to drive. Let's look at maybe having somebody else drive you. Rush hour traffic. Let's don't plan on you driving during rush hour traffic, Mom. Or the highway. Why don't we stay off of 240 and let's just stay on the smaller. Let's stay off of Poplar as well because those lanes are about this wide, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the smart technology that's built into modern cars, because some of it can be a real help to keep older drivers behind the wheel.
It sure can. I mean, most of the new cars now have the backup cameras. Mine has that, and it saved me a lot because if you think about it, when we were young, when we taken our driver's test, and for years, we were taught to look behind us. You got to look in the mirrors, but you also turn this way. So if you're a senior, you may not have quite an easy time turning to look behind you. So you've got the cameras, you've got devices that tell you if you're crossing a lane or if you're too close to another car. There's great technology out there for safety, like the OnStar, the GPS devices that help you find your way back home. So there's a lot of good stuff out there.
But you have to master that, correct?
You sort of have to be a master, and certainly not everybody can afford a new car with all that technology either.
True.
So that's not always the answer.
Right.
But conversations to discuss these things oftentimes are the answer.
You know, I found it surprising in your survey that nearly half of the people surveyed who had had their keys taken away and had stopped driving said that it really didn't make a difference. It didn't affect their lives substantially, which I found to be amazing. What then are the alternatives that a family member or a friend should put forward as how Mom or Dad's going to get from point A to point B?
Yeah, that's the question. And so I think the answers are, again, when you're talking to a loved one, have that plan. Talk to family members, church members, friends who are able to step in and help a senior remain independent by going to places. That's what we do at home instead. We provide caregivers in the home that do a lot of things, including transportation. So have a plan and have plenty of alternatives before you have that conversation. Because if you have the conversation and you don't have a plan and alternatives, it will very potentially be a negative conversation.
And I guess until we have self-driving cars, we all have them, this is going to continue to be a problem, isn't it?
I think this has been a problem since Henry Ford was around, and it'll probably be a problem until cars stop running.
Well, Ken, thank you for being on The Best Times with this great advice about how to keep the keys or how to take them away. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
For more advice on when and how to hang up the car keys, go to caregiverstress.com and click on the Let's Talk About Driving banner. As we just heard, giving up driving doesn't mean giving up your independence, but it does require more planning to get from point A to point B. Aging commissions across the country get calls every day from seniors asking questions about everything from Meals on Wheels to Medicare. But the number one question they ask concerns their transportation needs. How can you get to your doctor's appointment halfway across town when you can't drive? That's the plight of almost 8.5 million older Americans. But there is a nonprofit organization called ITN Memphis that helps area seniors who just need a lift. On a Thursday morning, Tommy Cervetti, a volunteer driver for ITN Memphis, is giving a ride to Priscilla Duncan. She's on her way from her East Memphis apartment to a luncheon about 12 miles away in Cordova. This is her third trip with ITN Memphis, the local arm of the Independent Transportation Network, founded in 1995 by Catherine Freund.
Since most older people are dependent on the private automobile for access to the necessities of life, and since on average people outlive their decision to driving by a remarkable 10 years, and more than half of people over 65 in this country live in communities that have absolutely no public transportation whatsoever. There's a huge unmet need for transportation so that people can remain in their homes and live a life that is worth living.
ITN Memphis is one of 22 affiliates throughout the country. They've been in operation since December of 2014 and so far have given rides to about 450 people. The drivers are volunteers that have been trained and cleared by ITN. Riders must be over 60 or over 18 and visually impaired to use the service.
They pay a membership fee of $45, and then they fund their own personal transportation account. And once they have all that done, then we're able to start giving them rides. We charge $1.50 a mile, and there's a $3 pickup charge. And that's generally about half the cost of a cab ride.
With the spread of internet-based operations like Uber, there are the inevitable comparisons.
Some people call it Uber for grannies, but I would say it's like Uber in the sense that it's a private automobile that comes to your door and takes you where you need to go. But it's unlike Uber in many other ways. For example, with ITN, you can actually pay for your rides by trading the vehicle you no longer drive.
And volunteer drivers can even bank volunteer credits with ITN to be used for rides at a later date. Priscilla Duncan has arrived at her luncheon date. At an appointed time, Tommy Cervetti will return to take her home. For Priscilla, ITN service helps her maintain her independence.
Well, right now it is of physical value to me and emotional value and personal value in that someone can come and help me with my transportation to and from the events that I want to go to.
You know, you think of transportation as just being a ride, but the truth is that in our lives, for all of us, mobility means way more than just getting a ride from one place to another. And the feelings of belonging and safety and being a part of something, being connected to the community is a large part of what transportation is in people's lives. You know, it connects us. It is much more than just a ride.
For more information about becoming a member or a volunteer driver for ITN Memphis, call or go to their website. Our vision is one of the most important senses we use in driving a car. But as we get older, our vision can suffer. By age 65, 1 in 3 Americans has some form of vision-impairing eye disease. Cataracts are the leading cause of low vision, affecting about 40% of people over age 70. And age-related macular degeneration is the leading cause of blindness for Americans over 50. If you want to stay on the road, it may be a good idea to keep an eye on your future. How do our eyes change as we age?
First and foremost, that affects 100% is difficulty reading. Need for bifocals, need for multifocals, need for a second pair of glasses. That's just a normal aging change, but it's something that will hit every single person, which means that over 90% of patients over age 50 have some need for spectacle correction or contact lenses or something.
How do cataracts develop, and are they treatable?
As the cataract starts to develop, it starts to turn yellow, which is interesting because if you look at a newborn baby, their lens inside their eye is so crystal clear and it's almost impossible to see. About age 50 and 60, it's almost as yellow as a Post-it note. And if untreated at age 80, it's about as brown as wood. Cataracts are treatable. Treatable better today than any other time before. In fact, it's one of the easiest conditions to treat in aging. Surgical correction with an implantable intraocular lens is restoring patients' vision on a daily basis.
What are the symptoms of macular degeneration?
It affects vision seriously. The best way I could describe it is if you're sitting down, you're looking straight ahead, take your fist, put it right in front of one eye, close the other eye, and that's what you see with macular degeneration. Wherever you look, that's where you can't see.
Can macular degeneration be cured?
The best news is in the past several years, 5 years for example, there have been some treatments via injection which have almost eliminated the wet form of this disease. We see it less frequently in the last several years than we have seriously over the last decade or two, which is fantastic. Meaning that the majority of patients today are dealing with the dry form of the disease, which is much less disruptive of vision. It'll still have an effect, but not drastically like it does in the wet form.
What is glaucoma?
Glaucoma is also one of the leading causes of blindness in the United States, and it is the #1 cause of blindness in our African American population in the United States. Glaucoma is historically known as a disease of high eye pressure in the eye. It's a disease where the optic nerve that allows us to see is affected adversely by this higher eye pressure, and over the course of time, slowly that nerve becomes eaten away and our vision becomes eaten away. Glaucoma is a troublesome disease. It's troublesome because it's highly treatable, very, very successful in a large percentage of patients. The problem is until very late in the disease course, it's asymptomatic.
How can we protect our vision?
Routinely, go to the doctor, get your eyes checked as an example. Just make sure you leave with some good news. You don't have X, Y, and Z. If on the flip side you get some bad news, at least feel rest assured that the quicker we can treat, in almost all cases, the better you will be.
What does the future hold?
Technology is our friend, even for patients who have suffered some vision loss. There are tremendous amounts of technology to help patients deal with the vision they have remaining. In terms of medications, powerful change. From topical medications to injectable medications to surgeries with robotic surgeries, laser surgeries. The future is incredibly exciting. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to find a cure for everything, but it means that the treatments will be much more tolerable, safer, easier to withstand, faster acting, and that's with all the diseases we've talked about so far.
If you'd like more information about your vision, go to the website of the National Eye Institute. Want more information about life after 50? Go online to watch more shows and find more resources. And send us your feedback and story ideas to besttimes@wkno.org. That's all for this edition of The Best Times. Please join us next week for more stories about life after 50. Until then, I'm Chris Hardaway. Thanks for watching. Good night. Funding for The Best Times is provided by the Plow Foundation, striving to do the greatest good by helping the greatest number of people since 1964. Additional funding is provided by the members of WKNO. Thank you.